Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, Ari and Big Mike are proud to present the greatest podcast in the world. No snowflakes allowed, and summer is coming.
This is the podcast that was started by two guys on cigar night. So, Claudine Gay is no longer the president of Harvard.
She is not.
I credit the work of the No Snowflakes Allowed podcast for this new development.
Okay, maybe, but that's like saying that like a butterfly flapping its wings in Japan caused a hurricane in Argentina.
Hey, you never know on this one. You never know. So the scandal of her plagiarism, the scandal of her disgraceful comments in front of Congress, and hopefully her disgraceful treatment of people like Roland Fryer and Ronald Sullivan Jr. has caused her no longer to be president of Harvard. Instead, she is a professor making almost $900,000 a year. Boy, did she pay for her crimes.
Wait, I don't understand. How is the professor making $900,000 a year?
Well, I guess if you're as good an operator in the political machine as she is, you get to make the big bucks.
Oh, she's talking about suing Harvard, too, because of its racist policies.
Well, that's the topic of our podcast. You see, Claudine Gay is blaming her having to step down as president of Harvard on racial animus. She doesn't mention that some of the people that she abused when clawing her way up the ladder were black men, like Roland Fryer, whom we discussed in our previous podcast. Ronald Sullivan Jr., she got him demoted because he helped to represent Harvey Weinstein. And a lot of students at Harvard were very upset about that, so she got him demoted. And as it turns out, he was also a black man, but somehow her mistreatment of these people had nothing to do with racial animus, and I'm wondering why.
You know what's funny? When we did the podcast on Claudine Gay, one of the slights against her is that she only published 11 papers, before she became president of Harvard. The interesting about that, at the time that we did the podcast, which was just a couple weeks ago, there were 4 instances of plagiarism that she was accused of. Now I think it's up to, 7? Out of those 11? Like, really? Like, okay, there's nothing wrong with her at all. She didn't do anything wrong. So it goes even further than that. The Associated Press called about Claudine Gay said, plagiarism is the new conservative weapon against higher education. Even it cites Chris Rufo, who offered $10,000 in a plagiarism hunting fund. These are Chris Rufo's words. We will expose rot in the Ivy League and restore truth rather than racist ideology as the highest principles of academic life. Right? Like, let me see if I got this right. He's not calling out racism. He's calling out plagiarism. And the AP in response is saying, oh, no, this is racism. So you know what I did? I did something really interesting. I Googled the term racism. I wanted to know, what exactly is racism? I want you to see this video by Ibrahim X. Kendi.
You talked about the importance of defining racism, but I, unless I missed it, which is possible, I didn't hear your personal definition. Is there one that you would offer us? Like, how do you define racism?
Sure. So racism, I would define it as a collection of racist policies that lead to racial inequity that are substantiated by racist ideas.
Where was the definition of racism? Right?
It wasn't there. It was a circular definition.
100%. So I Googled the term racism. I wanted a definition. And it was interesting because all I saw was definition after definition of a definition that none of them agreed upon. That was the interesting part. The definitions that were out there. What racism was versus what it is today are two different things. Racism in the 1800s was based on a science called eugenics, right? Which is saying that different races have different powers. Racism today is not like that at all. Because at this point right now, we recognize that just because the color of your skin doesn't change how smart you are or how good athletic you are or this, that, and whatever. We all have the potential to do whatever we want, right? It's about what we put forth. So listen, I want to talk about a guy I went to high school with. A guy, he was an All-American basketball player. And watching him play was phenomenal. He got scholarship offers. You name the school, he got it, right? And here's the thing, though. He went to this small university in upstate New York, right? And why did he go there? Because he wanted to be a neurosurgeon. He wanted to be a neurosurgeon because his mother died of brain cancer. So he was that guy. He was the guy who said, screw the NBA. I want to do something that's going to help the world. You know, it's something that we forget. It's something we forget. Like, and it doesn't matter what his color was, but just so we're clear, he was a black guy, right? Does that matter in any which way? No, it doesn't. To this day, this man who has more intelligence than me, a higher content of character than me, I don't even deny it, right? I consider him one of the inspirations in my life.
It's hard to find a pair of people who are ethnically more similar than we are. We're both descendants of Eastern European Jews, but nobody's going to confuse me for you or you for me. No one's going to say, oh, I saw him just before. Oh, no, sorry, that wasn't Big Mike, that was Ari. It's just not one of the things that's going to happen. There are, within races, massive, massive differences in all sorts of ways that you can measure people. So it seems to me that the only people who are holding genuinely racist ideas are cranks who have no real influence in the world. So what I think we should do is, because everybody's talking about racism all the time, especially in these contexts, what we should do is try to figure out what they mean by racism. Okay, so we already went through Ibrahim X. Kendi's definition, and that definition is circular. Racism is the support of racism. He's defining racism by using the term racist, which makes it what's called a tautology, a statement that can never be not true. Tautology is something like everything is either X or not X. You can never make that statement not true. And what that means is you could use the sword of racism on anything you want. You can attack anything as racist. In fact, pretty much everything you can think of has been attacked by academics as racist. For example...
Let me get some examples here. I'm excited for this.
Okay, for example, there's an article in the New York Times a couple of years ago, how drinking milk is racist. One question here, is there milk in that coffee that you're drinking right there?
100%. L'chaim, Togim, Shalom.
Okay, other things that have been called racist by academics is wood paneling, eating 3 meals a day. In fact, and on and on and on. The number of things that have been called racist by academics is like they're almost having like a contest. Who can find the most outlandish thing and find a reason to call it racist?
I'm really starting to believe that modern day racism is not what it once was. Where at one point when we're talking about 3 meals a day, that's because, Europeans came over with the 3 meals a day from the Middle Ages, and the Indians didn't eat like that, right? Like when it comes to milk, we already started talking about that. Like all these different things that they say are racist aren't necessarily racist. What I'm starting to believe actually is that instead of what we call racism in the modern day, is more of a classism issue. It's not about your color. It's more about where in the system did you start off at.
There technically kind of is real racists out there. There still is a Klan. But there's a guy, Daryl Davis. He's a musician and an activist. He's a black man. And he went to Klan meetings and went and spoke to the people who participated in these meetings. And he would ask them, why do you hate me? And he'd get to talking to them. And then after not that long a time, they would realize, I don't hate you. You're a really cool guy. And soon, these former racists, now former racists, would no longer be racist because they finally met somebody who's a really cool guy who just took the time to listen to them. And they realize, how can I possibly hate this guy? How can I hate everybody like him? It's just the most absurd thing ever. So, in that sense, racism, as it exists in real life, racism as a real thing, seems like it is in many cases fairly easy to cure if just by meeting people who are good people, who are people of different races. But there's an industry among politicians, among activists, among people who are shakedown artists who want to sue corporations for supposed racial discrimination, and people who want to charge money for racial sensitivity trainings. Those people are heavily invested in having racism continue to exist, having people perceive racism as a big problem. Those people will do anything they can to make it so that you can't deny that racism is the biggest thing going on. And that's why they have a circular definition of racism. It's as I said, a tautology. It is literally impossible to disprove. Even if you could disprove it, even if there's some logical structure that allowed you to do that, it's sort of like witchcraft or making a deal with the devil, or one of those things you can't disprove. You've been accused of racism. Go ahead and prove it. And as a lawyer, I could tell you that proving a negative, proving that something didn't happen, is the next thing to impossible. So these activists who make comfortable livings claiming...
Isn't that interesting, though? All the activists who are screaming about racism, they're the ones making all this money. But when somebody like Roland Fryer, who we did that podcast on, cites other stuff, they shut him down.
It was Upton Sinclair who said that it is next to impossible to convince somebody of something where his salary depends on not being convinced. And those people who make so much money, get so much political influence from selling snake oil that is intended to combat racism, they will never be convinced by a Daryl Davis who could show you how comparatively easy it is to convince a genuine racist that his ideas are absolutely bunk.
Right. But now, let me ask you an even further question. Since we're talking about racism, can black people be racist?
Well, if you're one of those activists who want to judge society, who want to make the rules that other people live by, then it's in your interest to claim that only white people could be racist. This way, you can use this term that used to really carry some punch. I mean, it used to be that, we had fought World War II against some of the most racist people who ever lived. After World War II, we combated the Jim Crow laws that were encoding racism into the laws of several states. So racism was a real thing, and being a racist was a terrible thing that if you were called that for many points in history, if you were called that, that was a serious insult, and you would really have to investigate who you are and make real changes in your life and in your beliefs. But nowadays, when this term is just flung around by anybody and for any reason, usually to gain power over others, it seems to me that calling somebody a racist is almost like a schoolyard taunt, calling them a poopy head or from Breakfast Club, neo-maxi zoom dweeby, right?
Oh, my Lord.
Hey, got to get the movie references in when you can.
Hey, you know what? Let's all go back to Shermerville,
Okay, so, but we don't live in like a dueling society anymore. It used to be when you were called a rascal or a scoundrel. That was a big enough insult that you would challenge somebody who called you that to a duel, because the only way to redeem your honor after being so insulted was to risk your very life. We don't live in a dueling society anymore, and if we did, and I'm not advocating that we start dueling again, but if we did, we'd have a much more polite society.
Well, hold on. Now, I'm just going to point something out. you look at those at a duel in society. Let's take early America, for instance. At the same point we had duels, we also tar and feathering taxmen. So I mean,
Well, it's not too. But
I mean, it's not so.
taxman, come on.
I mean, listen, I'm not opposed to the IRS is like, kind of scary. I don't want to get canceled like Uncle Roger here, but like the IRS does scare quite a lot of people, and there's nothing to fight them with. There's nothing to fight the man who like attacks me anymore. But see, that's the crazy thing. And I say this on purpose because one of the things that I'm noticing is if you question the activists, you're in the wrong. That's the interesting part. That definition of that video that we just saw, if I question his definition, if I go to Ibrahim and I'm saying, I don't like your definition, he's like, well, you're a racist. But I'm not. I just don't understand how you think that can be a legitimate Indian definition that you're pushing off on the world, because I'm thinking now more and more, and even in this conversation, I'm almost convinced that instead of racism that we're dealing with them, we're now dealing with classism versus commercialism versus like selfishness.
Well, if you're watching this video, I can almost guarantee that you are not a racist. But like any American, you're at risk of being called a racist because it's in so many people's interest to use that slur. And as far as I'm concerned, if someone's called a racist and they're not genuinely a racist, what they should just say is, go to hell, you manipulative psychopath. Because that's what it is. It's not a way to make the world better. It's not a way to call someone's attention to an irrational hatred that they have. It's a way of saying, I don't have power over you, and I want it. I want you to dance to my tune. And you know something? Go to hell, you manipulative psychopath, is the most legitimate response to that. Because we've learned that when people apologize to the cancel mob, all they do is they use that apology against you. They say, oh, well, you wouldn't have apologized if you weren't really guilty. Which is why which is why the best tactic to use at this point is to just call attention to what they're doing. You are trying to get power over me.
You know what the funny thing is, though? I'm a retired therapist, right? And I remember, like, I dealt primarily in addictions and crisis. And I used to ask people in the situations, do you want to be right or do you want to have peace? It was like, it was a fundamental place that I dealt with a lot of people of trauma, where I tried to get this idea, across. Because being right means that you're always going to be fighting. You're always going to be in this place. Now, if I believe I'm right and you believe you're right and we have opposing things, neither one of us are right and neither one of us are wrong at the same point, because there are so many factors to involve that it could be seen from both sides. So I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that, I'm right and you're wrong kind of thing. But what I can also say is that I don't want to deal with the problem anymore. Like, I want peace. I want to come to some sort of compromise where we all can be happy. And like you said off video and on video as well, is that they're not about, solving the issue. They're about making money for themselves. They're about like pushing forth an agenda that gives them a career.
When I was in driver's ed as a teenager, the teacher asked, would you rather be dead right or dead wrong? And the correct answer is neither. I'd rather be alive. What you were saying about would you rather be right or have peace is exactly correct. Let's look at an issue like affirmative action, for example. And if you're an American, you would think that affirmative action is a black-white issue, right? If black people, students are given affirmative action, and maybe it is. But in a worldwide context, affirmative action is a Chinese and Malay issue in Malaysia, where the majority Malay have affirmative action to protect their interests from the upstart Chinese or whatever. It's a caste issue in India. Affirmative action has been tried worldwide, and the results have never been what was promised by the intellectuals who come up with these harebrained schemes. There are a number of problems with affirmative action, And the people who are pushing it seem like they're so much more interested in keeping the scheme going so they can keep their jobs, so they can keep on looking at what colleges are doing, what employers are doing, and being the ones to judge. Are they doing okay or are they not doing okay? But the fact remains that there's never going to be a situation where there's racial balance everywhere because there are so many places to be. For example, you can, if we ever achieve some sort of a racial balance in, I don't know, particle physicists or whatever, then the university, whoever is responsible for translating cuneiform documents, trust me, there won't be racial balance there. The idea of having equal outcomes is just absurd no matter how you look at it because there's so many different outcomes. I mean, how many donut shops are owned in, say, the state of California? And if so, what's the racial balance of their owners? And if you get some sort of racial balance that you find acceptable, okay, how about auto mechanics? And you can go on and on and on and on. And there's just so many things and so many outcomes you can have in life that having every single one of those outcomes be acceptable to some third-party observer who has appointed himself to be the official judge of racial equity is absolutely impossible. And that's the secret of using supposed racial justice as a criteria for judging society, because no matter what, it's always going to be a problem because there are always more places, more outcomes that can still be judged. Because you know something? There are just that many outcomes in the world.
Oh my God, there's so many outcomes. And I tell you, it's the biggest problem that I'm finding. The more we're talking and the more I'm thinking and the more I'm trying to understand, I don't have a good solution except to say that we as a society need to get humble. And we need to have the ability to listen to each other and to talk like adults.
I've mentioned that I don't think you should use foul language on this podcast, and you just used the worst word in the English language, and that word is solution. Remember, the great Thomas Sowell said, there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. And once we realize that, we are moving closer to making things better. Because we realize you get a little bit of this, you give a little bit of that. That's the best you could ever do. There are no solutions. There are no ways of solving problems so that they're gone for good.
I look through my friends that I've had over the years, and it doesn't matter what color they are, whether they were black or white or Asian or Indian or whatever. The one thing that made them my friends over the years?
They were nice people.
Yeah, and we had that emotional connection. And it didn't matter about color. It never did. And that's why I don't understand the racism. Because I'm not. You can call me racist, but it's just not going to be true. I don't care what color you are. I care about, you're the content of your character.
People living near each other, being neighbors with each other, and saying, our racial differences or whatever are irrelevant. That does not offer enough opportunities for graft and profit and power for those people who want to be in control.
I want to thank you all for listening. If you're still here, make sure to like and subscribe.
And remember that my novel series, Kingmaker, is available on Amazon and on my YouTube channel. The first book, Consent, is an audiobook for free on Kingmaker. The other two books are available now on Amazon.